Okay, have a good meeting.
Okay, this is Gary Lamel. It is 10 a.m. on January 21st, 2021, and I hereby call to order the monthly meeting of the South Carolina Commission on Disabilities and Special Needs, and would ask Commissioner Blackwood to please read the notice of meeting statement.
A meeting notice announcing the date, time, and place of the January 21st, 2021 Commission meeting was distributed January 19th, 2021 to appropriate media and other groups or individuals who have requested notification. The announcement and agenda were posted at the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs Central Administrative Office and on the website. The public has been notified that accommodations such as interpreters, mobility assistance, and other assistance will be provided to individuals with disabilities and special needs if requested in advance.
Thank you. Would next note that all commission members are present, but I would ask those of staff who are in room 251 as part of the broadcast, please introduce themselves for the video.
This is Mary Poole,
Chris Clark,
Rufus Britt,
Lori Manis,
Susan Beck.
Christy Lingard.
Anyone else present?
No, sir.
Okay. So the first item would be the adoption of the proposed agenda. Does anybody have any requested changes, amendments, or modifications of the agenda as proposed? Hearing none, would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Blackwood.
I so moved, David.
Second.
Okay.
Wood.
And just for the recording, just let's make sure we always identify ourselves. So that was David with the motion and Robin with the second. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the agenda is adopted. Moving on, would call upon Commissioner Miller to give us the invocation for today. Ed?
Lord, as we assemble, carry on the work of the South Carolina Disabilities and Special Needs, let your work be done. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the December 17th, 2020 Commission meeting minutes. Hopefully everybody had a chance to review those. Does anybody have any changes, modifications, or additions to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, would then entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
I heard Commissioner Malfris and Commissioner Miller, so we'll treat that as a motion and a second from them. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, then the minutes are approved as presented. Next item up is the commissioner update. Anyone have any updates for us?
This is Commissioner Rawlinson.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to do a shout out to one of our employees over in Colleton County at the Board of Disabilities and Special Needs. Darren Sisk was celebrating his 32 years of service with Colleton County Board of Disabilities and Special Needs this past week. I just think that's to be commended to have employees that have been with us 32 years in those areas.
Fantastic. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah.
Anything else by way of update? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Public input. It's my understanding that we have one request for public input from Jason Tavener regarding the upcoming budget for the state. If we could go ahead and get Jason on the line.
Jason is on the line.
Okay.
Jason?
Yes, hello?
Jason, this is Gary Lamel. Can you hear me?
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're recognized for public input.
Thank you. So once again, good morning. My name is Jason Tavener. I'm the Executive Director of the Lawrence County DSM Board, and I'm speaking to you today in that capacity. Recently, the governor released his budget for the FY 21-22 year. In his suggested budget, DSM will receive $1,808,437 in new funding to address residential expansion.
No.
While residential expansion is a need and was included on the DDSM budget priority item number 6, it was not number 1 by DDSM and the commission, and I believe that for a reason. I'm very concerned about the growing services. About growing services in residential, while the current rates for residential services are significantly underfunded. A fact that has been confirmed by the Mercer report, and a fact that I believe the commission and DDSM management recognized and plan to address by making the increase of residential rates your number 1 budget priority. I have witnessed firsthand as the commission made the conversion to fee-for-service a priority and how unwavering your focus can be. I implore you now, as a commission, as DDSM management, to use that same vigor, tenacity, or as we would say up here in rural Lawrence County, your bullheadedness with the General Assembly, to act upon the vote you took to prioritize residential increases as your number 1 priority. The Lawrence County DSM Board will be notifying our delegation of our position on this topic, and a copy of that letter will be shared with DDSM management and the commission. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today by phone, and I thank each of you as commission members for your service. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate the input. Did I hear something from any input from staff with regard to that? Or was that just some background chatter?
Yes, if you don't mind, Mr. Clark
ma'am.
would like to speak to that because there might be.
I thought I heard Chris.
Yeah, I think there was a misunderstanding in regards to what the governor's budget presented. What they provided to us is an appropriation transfer between us and HHS, which is a standing practice where it's called the first filled slots funding. Essentially, when we add a waiver slot, we also are responsible for all state plan Medicaid services that come along with that. We are billed for the match on those funds, and they do an appropriation transfer annually of a fixed dollar amount for each new slot we bring online within the prior fiscal year. So we run a report March to April, send that report over, and they give us around $4,000 per slot through an appropriation transfer. So if you look at HHS, they say they were awarded $10 million in new dollars, but if you back out the $1.8 million that we got in first filled slots, it balances them back to $10 million. So you can easily trace through that it's simply money out of HHS budget moved to our budget. So there was no money for rate increases or residential expansion. To the point of rate increases, I would like to state that we're taking a two-pronged approach to this. We are convinced that we already have existing state appropriations and cost in the system to get rate increases, so we are aggressively working with HHS on almost a weekly basis to get rate increases with Medicaid without legislative appropriations. We don't feel we need them, but we would like them to add new dollars to the residential rate. So we've got two approaches. One is getting the rate increased for the fact that it doesn't support existing cost, and another project related to getting new dollars that can be distributed to providers. And so number 1 request still is our residential rate, and we have a budget hearing coming up next week, and we plan to make that very clear in our presentation.
Thank you for that additional information, Chris. Any other questions regarding that from any member of the commission? Okay. All right, that was the only.
So there was no money for residential expansion. So he misspoke on that, right? That's not.
That is
what he
true.
just said.
There's no money, but it's just the governor's budget at this point.
Right.
And our residential expansion request is way down the list. We don't anticipate getting any new beds, and in fact, we have bed vacancies in the system that management's been looking at, trying to figure out how to utilize those to meet these needs. that already exist.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the commission committee business. We will start with the policy committee and recognize Commissioner Malfris, the committee chair, to take that over.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I'm Barry Malfris, the committee chairman, of course, for the policy committee. I'll let Susan do some of these, and I'm going to take some of these for the sake of clarity and the sake of detail. The one I am going to mention. I assume, Susan, I heard your voice in there earlier. You here, right?
I'm present.
Okay. All right. What I wanted to say about, we were taking up the bylaws in order to address two things. One was, the primary thing was the emergency what's called an emergency meeting in the Freedom of Information Act, so that although we encourage people to, we would encourage us to wait 5 days to have a meeting. We can also have an emergency meeting if that becomes necessary. That takes 2/3 majority of the commission in order to call an emergency meeting, and that is pursuant to the section 30-4-80 of the Freedom of Information Act, and that's number 3 on page under. That's number 3 on meetings, which would be page 3 of your bylaws for anybody that wants to know. And also, we made one other change to clarify that all committees. Help me out with that, Susan. What did we clarify on that other change we wanted to make? I'm sorry.
Sure, it's no problem. On Article 7 committees, item number 2, which is on my page 3 of the bylaws, if y'all want to look at that. We just made that sentence a little bit clearer. Before, it listed a number of topics that the executive committee, which is the whole commission, would consider. And that really aligned with our current standing committees. So this sentence just states it better. It says the executive committee of the whole will include all commission members and will serve to consider and act on all committee recommendations.
That's the only 2 changes we have to the bylaws. Obviously, it takes a 2/3 majority, which is 5 out of 7 of us to, at least 5 out of 7 of us to approve any bylaws changes for the record, and we would ask for a motion to approve the bylaws changes.
I'll second the motion.
And that was approved in committee, so we'll treat it coming out of committee as a motion with a second already. Commissioner Rollinson, appreciate your willingness to do that.
Technically, we just need voting.
Right. Is there any further discussion regarding the bylaws as proposed amended this time? All right. Hearing none, all in favor of approving the bylaws as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, let the record reflect that those bylaws as amended were approved unanimously. Next item would be the committee procedures.
Yeah, the next item is the committee procedures. This is something we've been working on for a number of months. All of the committee chairmen are, I believe, acutely aware of what each committee says. And the first one is 800-07-CP, I believe. In it.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's the overview basically of each committee, and I think everybody is, like I say, all the chairmen and I suspect everybody on the commission are acutely aware of what it says, and we've been through and over it, and would ask that it was approved as written in your packets right now.
Okay. And again, I believe that was approved by the committee at
It was.
the policy committee. Okay, so we'll treat that as both a motion and a second, since it's coming out of committee approved. Does anybody have any questions regarding 800-07 CP as presented? Hearing none, would all in favor of the policy as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, let the record reflect that is approved unanimously. Next up would be 53507 DD.
$535. This relates to obtaining consent for individuals regarding healthcare and making healthcare decisions. There is some details about that I'll let Susan take. We went back through some of these for clarity purposes, the next one particularly, but Susan, you can give us the details on that one, 3507 DD.
Thank you. So the policy committee took up 53507 DD. We've already stated its title, and made some revisions, put them out for external review, and we received one set of comments from Disability Rights of South Carolina. Those comments were presented to the committee, and the version you have in your binders shows those comments as well as the final markup that was approved by committee. So we were able to kind of comprehensively, as staff, look at all of the directives associated with making healthcare decisions, make sure with our legal division, Constance Holloway, that we were in compliance with all the necessary codes, and are presenting this version of 53507 for approval.
And this version is the one that was approved by the policy committee, correct?
Yes.
No changes since that one. Okay. All right. So coming out of committee, it was approved. So we'll treat that as both a motion and a second. Does anybody have a question, any questions or comments regarding 53507 DD as proposed?
I don't have any question. I just want to make a comment that we think that we went back through this because we think it is particularly important, a particularly important policy and a particularly important part of our agency, and we are, and I for one am very happy with how it turned out and how and from where we started and where we are now, and I just wanted to commend those who worked on it, Constance and Susan and others, to make it where it is now.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I'd just like to say, I'd like to thank those who actually take the time. Disability Rights of South Carolina obviously took the time to really review these policies and offer us suggestions and comments. And I just want to thank those folks who actually take that time to do that for us. It does give us something to look at and to review, and we appreciate their input.
Thank you. Anything further? Hearing no further questions or comments, all in favor of the policy as proposed, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none of those, that policy as proposed is approved unanimously. Thank you. All right. Next, 53515 DD and 14 DD and 12 DD.
Commissioner Malford, would you like me to address these?
Yeah, go ahead. You can have these.
Okay. Chairman Lamel, I just would like to ask for a little direction. We are asking for the same action for the next 3 directives to be marked obsolete. Would you like me to review them as a group, or would you
I
like
think
to
we
do them
can.
separately?
Yeah, I think considering where they're at, I think we can review them as a group.
Okay. So if you'll permit me, I'll just review quickly. So we reviewed 53507, which your commission just approved. And in undertaking that review, as I said previously, we looked collectively at other related directives dealing with healthcare, made appropriate changes to that primary directive, 53507, and therefore are recommending that this set of 3 directives, 53515, 14 and 12 can be marked obsolete because they're no longer necessary. And those documents were reviewed by the committee, and
Correct.
that was the action of the committee to recommend that they be marked obsolete.
Correct. Okay. So since that motion to mark obsolete was approved by the policy committee, we'll treat that as both a motion and a second. So any further discussion regarding these 3 policies? Hearing none, all in favor, and I'm going to treat these as a group unless there's some sort of objection. All in favor of marking these 3 policies obsolete, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or any objections to treating them as a group? Any abstentions? Hearing none, we will go ahead and note that unanimously that we have decided to mark obsolete those 3 policies. Thank you. Okay. Anything further from the policy committee for this month, Barry?
Yeah, actually, we do have, Susan's going to give y'all, we're going to give a quick update on our progress for the last 6 months.
Okay.
Sure. I'll just say something briefly associated with the prior review of the healthcare directives. In some of the comments from Disability Rights SC, as well as our comprehensive review process, the committee referred an additional directive for us to bring back to policy committee at the next meeting, 60303, safety precautions for medical and dental treatment. So staff will be recommending any changes based on that review shortly. In addition, 2 directives are currently out for were out for external review, which ended yesterday. Today is the 21st, so they ended on the 20th, that were in the Finance and Audit Committee. Directives 200-01, which is personal funds maintained at the residential level, and 200-09, fees for residential services. It's my understanding that as I said, the external review for 10 business days has been completed, and we had 1 set of comments. So that will be reviewed by staff according to the Finance and Audit Committee procedure, and then go back to the Finance and Audit Committee to review those changes. Once it leaves committee, at whatever point that is, it will then go to the commission for review and approval. And then lastly, just an update on the policy committee progress so far. Just a quick reminder, we had at the beginning of this new policy committee cycle, we had 180 documents to review over a 4-year period. So that's 45 documents a year. At our halfway goal, we had already completed 36 document reviews, so well in line with getting to 45 if half a year we're at 36. So staff conferred with the chair, and the committee reviewed a recommendation to revisit our list. We've posted a new list of work that will take place in the second half of the fiscal year here, January to June, and an additional 30 directives. So at the end of this cycle, adding or deleting anything, we will have completed 66 documents. Again, our goal is 45. So we will be overachievers, which I know the commission appreciates, and are well on pace to achieve that goal. That concludes my update.
Thank you, ma'am. That concludes the policy committee for this month.
Thank you very much. All right, so moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the legislative committee business. And would recognize David Thomas to give us an update on that.
Good morning, Commission and staff, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is David Thomas, and we held our committee meeting last week. We're driven, I say driven, more or less directed by the supplement agreement. I think that was included in y'all's packet. If it's not, we want to make sure you have a copy, all the commission members have a copy of the settlement agreement, as well as what is called, it's only a 2-page document, settlement agreement, as well as the Legislative Oversight Committee of the House from November 2, 2018, study of the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs. Real interesting document. And Mr. Chairman, I would ask that if y'all don't have that staff be directed to make sure all commission members have a copy of the Legislative Oversight Committee document. Now, it's particularly important for Ms. Kim, who is our relations, I've forgotten what your title is, Kim, but the relations between liaison, I guess is the word, between the legislature and us. If I am ever called, or Kim is ever called, or before this committee, this review committee, or some aberration of it, I don't know if it still exists as a committee or if they keep it going or whatever. But this is a document that will come up, and they will ask specifics about it. And I think it would behoove the members of the full commission to at least be aware of this, because if you're in a discussion ever in front of the legislature or trying to answer questions, this would be a touch point. And so you would at least need to be, I think, vaguely familiar, if not intimately familiar, with the basic parameters of the recommendations. Now, having said that, Mr. Chairman, having said that, I would ask that you allow me also next month to review some of the elements of this document, and if I could be put on the agenda when it's my turn. I don't know if we'll have recommendations on regulations next month, but I would ask I be put on the agenda to briefly discuss the Legislative Oversight Committee's recommendations. And again, that's the study of the Department of Disability and Special Needs, put out November 2, 2018. At our committee meeting, at our subcommittee meeting, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you being present, sir, and I'm speaking to Chairman, of course, all the members of the subcommittee. We had a great staff representation. Mary was there, Susan Beck was there, Kimberly, of course, and Constance. And they kind of kept us on track, because this whole issue of regulations, of course, is not a policy issue. It has to go before the legislature, and everybody, I'm sure, on the commission and listening out there by audio know that this presents a whole other element of what has to be done to get something approved. Now, we had two things that we looked at, Mr. Chairman, and if the group will look at these articles that are there under tab 7, 8, 9, and 10, you will see the various things that that our staff will be discussing in just a minute. Kim, would you like to start off on Article 3, 5, 7, and 8, or would you rather Constance, or you tell me which one you'd rather jump in at this point to explain the technicals?
I'll take it. Constance is in a CLE right now, so she's
on the phone if need be.
Yeah, she's listening in if need be, but I'll take the lead if that's okay. Okay. Well, all right, we'll start out with Article 3. And Commissioner Thomas mentioned that 2018 oversight report. And in that report, they suggested that we go through all of our regulations and update them. So that Article 3 is part of that. We looked at it and saw that we no longer have recreational camps for persons with intellectual disabilities. So our proposal is to strike that and repeal it in its entirety. So does anyone have any questions?
And as I understand it, essentially what we are doing now is if we approve it here, it's basically going for publication So it can be published for the appropriate amount of time, and then we have to have the public hearing on it, correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
correct.
So
And
our-
this whole process then, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, this whole process
go ahead.
then establishes a time frame for what we have to fit into to get this approved by the legislature by way of a reg as opposed to an internal policy.
Right. So essentially the motion today would be to go ahead and get it published to start that process off.
That is correct.
Right.
All right. Does anybody have any, not to take over for you, David, I apologize, but the committee did vote on this and approved to have that particular published as essentially struck. Does anybody have any questions regarding Article 3?
All of them. Yes, sir.
Okay. So we'll treat that as a motion and a second coming out of committee. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor of approving that for publication as essentially deleted, but as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, that is approved to be published as presented. Okay. Next will be.
Now, Mr. Chairman, I think we're on, if we can just sequentially go down the list, then
Yes,
then
sir.
it would be the next item, Article 5, and then Article 7, then Article 8.
Yes, sir. So if we'll go forward with
So
Article 5.
I'd ask Kim to go ahead and explain number 5. Article 5, excuse me.
Okay, Article 5, 7, and 8 are brand new regulations, and these regulations are coming from that settlement agreement with disability rights. So the first one, Article 5, is eligibility determination, and it's based on Directive 100-30. So everything in here, although it's brand new in the regs, it's things that our agency is already doing. So we're just putting a directive that we're already following into our regs with the legislature. So if anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer them. This was approved by the committee. So we'll just go from there to see if there's any discussion.
One question the chairman of the subcommittee has is 100-3. When was that policy adopted or promulgated by the department?
So I'm so glad you asked that question because I do not have a copy in front of me. This is Susan Beck, but I do recall from my review of it this morning that our last approval was 2018 of our eligibility criteria. I hope that 2018, and I hope that that's correct. We update our directives periodically, and I believe that last update focused on the different terminology for autism spectrum disorder when that was reviewed and put in place. We've also done some work recently with the eligibility criteria, probably back to 2018 or so. A little before that, focused on the developmental period for intellectual disability, just providing more clarity on that.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner Thomas?
Yeah, that's fine.
Any further questions regarding Articles 5, 7, or 8 as proposed?
So in Mr. Chairman, the on number 5 at 7 and 8, the idea is that we had regs or internal procedures already in place, and the reg essentially is identical to what the procedure is. And I asked a lot of very specific questions about that because I didn't want the ground shifting on anybody out in the world who is counting on the reg to say certain things, on the policy to say certain things, and then the reg changes by some nuance. So this is the opportunity that we have coming up when we discuss in just a minute the public hearing opportunity. If somebody has anything they want to challenge on this, if they're looking, for instance, in comparing a directive that is the internal directive to a regulation that we are promulgating, and that the public hearing will be the time that they should say, wait a minute, you said that this was pretty much identical to what was already being used, but I see some substantial change that's going to affect the way things are that will be to the detriment. And I want to make sure that's kind of heard loud and clear. There's going to be an opportunity for public hearing, but we've been assured, the subcommittee has been assured by the staff that what we're seeing as follow me now, that what's being promulgated as a regulation like law, code, and regulation, that it is consistent with what is the internal, what is being done now by way of internal policy. Now, staff can correct me, but that was repeated over and over again, and I wanted to make sure that nothing's, as we used to say, there's no slip between the cup and the lip here. That there's nothing new that is being promulgated that's different from what the internal policy is now. Now, you may disagree with the internal policy, so you might disagree with the reg. But in theory, if it's okay now with the internal policy, it should be all right with the reg, is I hope what, Mr. Chairman, you and the commission understand.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll just, since we've got 3 separate articles, we'll go ahead and treat each independently for purposes of our vote. Each was approved by the legislative committee, so we'll treat that coming out of committee with both a motion and a second to publish as presented. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
I apologize, but let me make sure also that when the subcommittee took this up, we took them up and discussed the items individually. So we didn't vote on them or discuss them in bank. We looked at them individually. I asked questions, opened the floor up for questions individually on each of the items, 5, 7, and 5, 7, and 8. And we can discuss them however you want, but the subcommittee did isolate each of the articles to make sure that we were focused on each one when we voted on each one. Now, if the full commission wants to analyze and look, that's perfectly okay, because that's how we did it. But if you glance through them and you don't have a question after my laborious explanation, then I'm fine with taking them all up and just, voting on them sequentially in order and quickly. Whatever you want to do, Mr. Chairman, and the commission.
I appreciate that. I think since we had separate motions on each coming out of committee, we'll treat them each for an individual vote just to be consistent, since the subcommittee did all that work on them. So with regards to Article 5, again, we have that motion to publish coming out of committee to take that next step. Does anybody have any discussions regarding Article 5 or questions? Hearing none, then all in favor of approving Article 5 for publication as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, then Article 5 is approved for publication. Next, moving on to Article 7. Again, had a motion approved by the committee, so we will treat that as a motion in a second. Any further discussion regarding Article 7 at this time, or questions? Hearing none, all in favor of approving Article 7 for publication as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, then Article 7 is approved for publication. Moving on to Article 8, again, there was a motion that was approved by the subcommittee, so we'll treat that as a motion and a second for purposes of our discussions here. Any further discussions or questions regarding Article 8 as proposed? Hearing none, would all in favor please indicate by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, then Article 8 is approved for publication. And David, if you can give us an update after the publication, the sort of time frame that we're looking at for the.
Yeah, that was next up, Mr. Chairman. If you would allow me just an insert here, it's not actually down on the agenda, but I would like for staff to brief the group on what the time frame is now. At this point, we adopted that also. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we're as a group supposed to adopt that or not. I think once we pop the thing in for publication, it has a life of its own. But I'll let Kim discuss that. Kim, you want to talk about the time frame now that we have for the public hearing?
Okay, thank you, sir. These will be published in the February 26th State Register, and so at that point we will have we recommended that we hold a special meeting and have a public hearing on March 29th. Because once you have to have it at least 30 days after the date of publication, and that being on the 26th, that leaves us to the first available date is Monday, March 29th. And then at that point, once we have the public hearing, now we have to schedule the public hearing, but we don't have to hold the public hearing unless at least 25 people have expressed interest in speaking, or an entity or government body has expressed interest in speaking about the regs, or an agency or organization with at least 25 employees. Now I do anticipate that happening since 5, 7, and 8 are from that settlement agreement with disability rights. I do believe that they may have some input. So we do anticipate holding that public hearing. And then after that public hearing, they will be submitted to the legislature. And then the legislature will give them to the committees, and the committees will then discuss them. And there's a lot of different things that could happen. I have a flow chart if anyone is interested in learning about the reg process. That's really all I have. Does anyone have any questions or need any clarification on anything?
Do we have to vote in any way to have it submitted to the legislature, or it's automatic after we have the public hearing?
Yeah, what you have to do is you really won't have to re-vote on them, I guess, unless we have significant changes.
Okay. So depending on what happens on the 29th and whether we want to make revisions. Okay.
Can you give us the time on that meeting, if you don't mind?
3 p.m.
Okay.
And we have to send out the notice at least 5 days before, so we'll probably won't publish that until the week before sometime.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could just make one more brief statement, then I'll be concluded. I want to make sure that the public, whoever's listening, the public groups, and everybody out there, talking to the commission members, I know some groups are listening. There may be 20 people listening, there may be 2,000 people listening for all I know, but this is a great opportunity if you have any question whatsoever as we start running through regulations, because part of the oversight, Mr. Chairman, commission members, is that the oversight recommendation was that the things, regulations that really should have been promulgated have not been promulgated and should be taken out of the directive category and put into a reg category. And they noted in the oversight analysis at one point that regs had not been promulgated for 2 decades, they said. And we're, I think, kind of astonished at that. But anyway, so that's why we're having to move to put regulations out, because we're being prompted fervently by the Oversight Committee out of the House, which is the document that I referred to a little while ago. So this is a great time. I'm not negative about that. This is a great time for the public to really analyze closely. And if I would say to the public, if you've got an issue or a question, now's a great time just to email us. And so we're available on email, and you can, send it to me. I get all the emails that are sent to me. And if there's a substantial issue, I'll certainly bring it up by way of the possibility of revision. So we want to make sure there's real transparency here. The public's totally involved, and you're welcome to comment and make your voices heard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And so going back to the bylaws, which we discussed earlier about the calling of a meeting, since I believe that the public hearing would qualify as such, would entertain just a motion on the record at this point in time, since we're so far in advance, to hold the public hearing as tentatively scheduled at the end of the legislative committee on March 29th at 3 p.m. At the central offices for the department.
So
we have a motion. Thank you, Commissioner Miller. Do we have a second?
Bearing now for second.
Thank you. Any further discussion about that date and time? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? So pursuant to the bylaws, that meeting is now set for the 29th at 3 p.m. Thank you. Any further business from the Legislative Committee? Hearing none, we'll.
That is all. That is all. Unless I've missed something, Kim, did we catch everything?
I think that's it.
All right. Thank you. That's it.
What I would say, pursuant to your request, Commissioner Thomas, Christie, if next month on the agenda you can make sure to touch base with Commissioner Thomas and make sure that the elements that he wanted on the agenda are there.
I will.
Thank you. David, is that gonna meet what you were asking for? If you get together with Christie when we put that proposed agenda together? Okay. All right. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we'll get the report out to everybody, including the plan that we had sent and all the updates that have been sent since.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Moving on then. Going on to old business. First is a case management update from Lori Manis.
Hi, thanks for letting me come speak to you today. It's been, I think since July of 2020 since I've been here. You guys have continued to receive the billing report letters that go out to providers in your monthly package that include the average revenue bill per person, the error rates, and any monthly missed contacts. In preparation for this meeting, we kind of looked at the average revenue billed per individual from July through December, which is kind of the last 6 months that I haven't been here reporting to you. Our average for that time period was $106.40. We then looked at last year from July to December, kind of the same 6-month period. And the average revenue at that time was $104 per person. So that's very significant because July 20 through December 20 was in the midst of, the pandemic, and there was limitations to billing the higher rate because of travel. But even so, our case management providers have worked to increase their revenue per person. They're doing more things with people, so we're very happy about that. Even with the increase and with case management providers continuing to just do a great job to live in this world of fee for service, we have had a few agencies who've terminated their contracts with DDSN. So since May of 2019, which was really just a couple of months before the implementation of fee for service, we've had 6 providers terminate case management contracts. 4 of those were boards and 2 of those were private providers. We also have 2 more that are in progress of terminating their contracts. One will end at the end of February. The other one will end at the end of June. We've been able to successfully transition cases to alternate providers. We haven't had a problem with providers being available in areas, and a couple of the terminations were in very rural areas. So at the same time that that's happening, we have other agencies, boards in particular, who are, instead of terminating their contracts, they're expanding their counties that they're going to serve. So what that tells us is those boards intend to stay in the case management business, and they're going to serve people in other counties. And we've had 9 requests for county expansion since the first of this month. Like, we just put something out, and so we got 9 in the month of January, which is pretty significant. As far as error rates in the monthly billing report, they've continued to be minimal. People have gotten really good at correcting any errors on their invoices. The missed monthly waiver case management contacts average from July to December is about 4%, a little more than 4%. One of the things we noticed in recent months is, well, a couple of things. First of all, sometimes it really just is a one-off why you didn't make that monthly contact, right? You try to call mom and dad, nobody's answering. You try to go by the house, nobody's there. You know, it's really the fault of the case manager. The other thing is sometimes a monthly waiver case management contact comes due at enrollment, and people get enrolled at the very end of the month. So like if I got enrolled on the 30th, I really have one day or I've missed that contact. So we started looking at people who have missed waiver case management contacts for 2 consecutive months, okay, instead of just that one month. And what we saw was that only 207 people out of 12,382 participants didn't have contact. That's like 1.6%. So we're actually reaching out to individually to each of the providers about those particular people, because there's a concern if people haven't had contact for 2 months. So that's just some general case management stuff. Do y'all have any questions about that? I have a couple of other topics that are related to case management. I just want to make sure you don't have any questions about the report.
I only have one. The 4% you're talking about with the missed contacts, what number does that equate to approximately?
It's about between 450 and 500 people out of 12,300 and some. You know, our enrollment differs too each month, so it's not always an exact number, but somewhere about 450 to 500 people out of about 12,000 people. So it's not a great number. It's and like I said, when you talk about 12,000 people, there's all kinds of things that can happen. We started looking at the monthly contacts and realized that it wasn't as bad as it looked, right? As we started digging into it and contacting providers, which is why we decided to kind of go to this 2 months in a row.
The 2 months makes a lot of sense to me. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. The next thing I
Lori,
wanted to
hang on, Lori, I had one
sorry.
question related to what you just said about the expansion. And it sort of swings back to like the Conflict Creek question, and maybe you can answer this for me. If provider A, provides services in county A, right? But they say we're going to do case management in county B, but they don't actually provide any services over there in county B. Is it considered conflict free for the people that they have in county B?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about conflict-free case management
Okay.
later, but here's the rule.
If you want to wait, just tell me. We're going to talk about that.
And I'll try to hit it then, and then
Perfect.
if I don't, come back to that question.
Sounds perfect. Thank you.
So the next thing I wanted to just inform you about is the Appendix K authority to all the waivers with DDSN. As you remember, when the pandemic started, DHHS wrote an Appendix K, which is kind of a temporary way to change service delivery in the midst of a pandemic. Some of the things that they did was they added like in-home supports as a self-directed service to the ID waiver. They allowed people to receive day services in residential settings, right? There were these kind of things. They allowed for replacement services. Like if the day program was closed, they allowed people to get personal care in their homes instead of the day service, right? So that Appendix K Appendix K has been around for a long time with CMS, and it's always been that an Appendix K can only last for 1 year. That's the maximum amount. So the Appendix K was set to expire on the 26th of January. But HHS CMS allowed states to do some extensions because of the public health emergency. So on the 15th of January, HHS got approval for extension of our Appendix K, and the extension date is written as it will expire no later than 6 months after the expiration of the public health emergency, right? So we kind of have some latitude. We still are going to have to be mindful about how we approve services and how long, and because the public health emergency could end at any point, and then you got to figure out how to roll stuff back up. That's part of the issue, is we have lots of paused disenrollments out there. We got lots of people in replacement services. We have people in services that aren't traditionally in that waiver. So once we decide the Appendix K is over, we have to have an effort to get people back where they belong. So that is good news. One of the really good things was HHS was helpful enough to know that it was coming and kind of give us a couple weeks lead in to say, go ahead and extend services to the 31st of March, because we were getting to the end of December and families were kind of panicking, right? Because they knew that they had services that were only approved through the 26th of January. So, any questions about the Appendix K? Okay, good. The next thing is conflict-free case management. Just to kind of, Gary, address your question. The rule with conflict-free case management is that an agency cannot provide case management and direct services to the same person, right? So it's not about counties. As a board, I can still provide direct service in Greenville County and still provide case management to some people in Greenville County. I just can't provide it to the people who get direct service for me. I can't do case management for people that come to one of my day services or for people who live with me residentially. So the rule is not that boards have to choose, I'm going to do one or the other. They just have to know that they can't do both for the same person. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, but I mean, isn't an element of the conflict-free that the case manager is free to recommend, services essentially, or suggest services? And
so
isn't the element that they want to recommend that I guess it just means they can't recommend the services that agency provides at all.
So whenever the original transitional framework was written into the waiver document, there was a lot of discussion about whether it's a clean break, meaning you got to do one or the other, or it's going to be a situation where you can't do both for the same person. At the time, with public input, it was written into the document this way. So this is what we have approved, and this is kind of what we're implementing. I will say that, so just to give you an idea of what we've been doing related to conflict-free case management, HHS developed a project plan, then DDSN kind of developed its own project plan to kind of make sure that we meet all the benchmarks that are in that transition plan that was approved in the waiver. Some of the things we've already done is we've had all case managers go through person-centered thinking training. DDSN and DHHS are participating in monthly calls with CMS about conflict-free case management and the implementation. We have recently drafted a DDSN directive, and we're updating procedure manuals to reflect conflict-free case management. So in that, one of the things that's in that directive is what happens in what you're talking about. So let's say that a person is getting case management from the Darlington DSM board, and that person presents with the need for day services or residential services. The case manager can offer Darlington DSM board as a provider, but they must also offer any other available provider of that service. If that person chooses Darlington DSM board, that person is told you can no longer get case management from Darlington once you make that transition. And we built in like a 30-day time frame, because what we don't want to do is transfer people in the middle of a life change, right? So you want to make sure the person gets there, they understand, you know, the service is going okay, everybody's satisfied, and at that point they'll be given the choice of a case management provider that is not their residential or day provider. So that's kind of how that's written. Our next steps is, a big one is we're developing a communication plan for stakeholders and for individuals and families related to conflict-free case management. And we're trying to be real mindful that sometimes when state government just sends out a mass letter to people, it causes more confusion than it does good, right? So we're trying to talk with provider agencies. We had a case management work group yesterday, and we asked for some recommendations about what we could do to help get the word out to people so that they understand what it means and why we're doing it. One of the recommendations they had, which I thought was a really good one, was to do kind of a flyer that we could give to case managers to use to kind of start a conversation with families. We will do some training after that also with our providers before we implement the policy and the procedures. Our target date for policy implementation is June the 1st. And what I mean by policy implementation is you kind of have two things going on with conflict-free case management. You have everybody new entering into conflict, right? The person who needs a direct service tomorrow that starts into conflict. And then you have these existing people that have been in conflict for many, many years. So the importance of implementation of the policy is you stop new people from entering into conflict. So what that gives you is a list of people that you need to deconflict, a really good list of people who are currently in conflict. You develop a transition plan for these people, and what will happen is each provider will develop a transition plan, and those will all be turned into us, and DHHS will review those and develop a statewide transition plan. And from that number, we will do the deconflicting, which are like the percentages from year. I think the first 20% is must be deconflicted by December 31st of 2021. So what's happened naturally is these providers who have totally said we're not going to do case management anymore for anybody have already deconflicted because they've kind of gotten out of the business. So, you know, I feel really good about where we are with the project plan. We hope that the directive that we've drafted internally will be presented at the next policy committee meeting, and then it will go through the process, the normal process to get approval in order to be implemented. So, any questions about all of that?
All right. Thank you for that update, Lori.
I just have a question, Barry. Gary. That's kind of related, not really related to the conflict-free case management, just a general question about case management.
Sure, go ahead.
So, how are we seeing like the case managers' morale being impacted by some of the restrictions on their ability to actually see their clients and based on COVID and the fact that, a lot of people are still remote. A lot of the case managers aren't really able to see a lot of the clients on a face-to-face level like they used to. Do you get a sense that morale within the case managers are down because they don't have that interaction that they used to have with their clients, and with COVID continuing, social distancing continuing, for another many months? I just was curious about that. Just something if y'all have thought about that or talked about that at all.
Yeah, so I think that case managers, just like the rest of the world, are affected by the isolation and not being able to do things the way that we used to do it. What I find rewarding is that a lot of case managers have been very creative with ways to interact with people on their caseload. There are agencies who are doing driveway visits if the family is comfortable with it, meeting in the front yard, kind of trying to offer up to families some ways to interact in order to see people. For people that can use technology, I think they're trying to do as much virtual that is compliant with HIPAA. You got to be kind of careful with that, but case management providers from the beginning have really just tried to do what they can. Now, I do think it's difficult for them, and it's with case management, it almost always seems like the perfect storm. There's 15 million things going on: conflict-free, COVID, fee-for-service, somebody's going out of business, we're expanding. Like, there's just all of this change. But, I've been involved with case management for about 28 years in some form or fashion, whether it be here or at a provider agency or at the regional office when we used to have those. And it seems like case management's always in some level of change, so they kind of are resilient. But I appreciate you asking. I think it's something that we all need to continue to be mindful about.
And then the other question, you mentioned 6 providers at the beginning of the meeting, no longer offering case management. How many people does that represent? Clients does that represent?
So I don't have an actual number on the top of my head, but I can tell you that 1, 2, 3, 4 of them were very small, right? Like caseload and a half. So you're talking 65, 70 people. The last 2 were much bigger. So probably 4 or 5 caseloads each, which equals roughly 5 times 40, 250 people. One of the ones that's currently in process is pretty small. It's like a caseload and a half, 2 caseloads, and the other one is pretty large. So, but the good news about the last one that's pretty large is we've already received notice, and their intent to terminate their contract is the end of June. So they gave us a lot of time in order to make sure that we can transition those people and find providers that are available in that area. I will say we have not had any trouble with providers willing to take cases.
Okay.
With all those numbers, there's no one out there without a case manager.
Correct.
So, yeah,
and we've not had any bumps as far as people having to wait. Right. Now, I think the issue is if you had a lot of providers leave at one time, that's where you would run into a problem. So you know, we don't have a lot of people going at once, which has kind of been helpful.
Okay, that's all I have.
All right. Anyone else have any other questions for Lori? Okay. All right, Lori, thank you for that update and answering those questions for us.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda under old business would be the band BNI switch update. Chris.
All right, thank you. There is no information in your packet regarding this. I'm just going to give you an oral update on what's going on. First of all, I will say that I feel like this process has been very smooth thus far, so I'm waiting for the shoe to drop somewhere. You know, anything this magnitude, there's going to be invariably some hiccups, and I'm sure there'll be some down the road that we haven't foreseen, but I do feel like we have a good strategy, and everything we've done thus far has been with much thought and communication and support of our providers. To that end, we have a meeting Monday with them. You know, we've kind of taken a baby step approach to working with them because it's kind of like taking a sip of water from a fire hose. It's just a lot of information if you try and jam this all into one meeting. So we've kind of intentionally transitioned this over a period of time to make it more manageable. So Monday at, is it 3? 2 or 3, we have the, I thought I wrote that down. At 2 or 3 Monday, we have a meeting. I've invited all the commissioners. I think a couple of you have accepted the invitation, and we welcome you attending that. It will be offered virtually. And basically what this meeting will be is really getting into the brass tacks and the actual boots on the ground impact associated with the fee for service. Up to this point, everything's been theoretical and just big picture. So we'll be doing a deep dive into, you know, all the report changes, the processes, and everything. I've got a 4-page agenda right now outlined for that meeting, and it probably will grow even more. We'll have a lot of handouts and screenshots and instructions that we'll share. We did get the amendments done to take the funds effective January 1. That totaled $54.5 million approximately removed from the bands. And of course, that's a lot of sticker shock if you're a provider getting a huge amendment like that. Just seeing it actually hit the paperwork, you know, is shocking. So there has been, you know, some feedback in the network as far as, oh my God, this is a big number. So we have been working with some providers that have expressed concern regarding the impact. And as they run numbers on their side and comparing to our numbers. So we've been able to work through successfully thus far all of those inquiries so they can see the full picture, because you got to get all the pieces moving at one point to see that even though you've got a huge amendment reduced out of your contract, you're no longer having credit reports or very, very small credit reports taken from you for band B or I. Those ran almost $45 million last year for those two things. We're not recouping respite from the regional center, district payrolls, which are massive. Medicare Part D is no longer being recouped. We're going to be paying them fee for service for day programs. So while they lost the capitated payment, they'll be getting retrospective instead of prospective payments for day services. So you got to factor that in. And then, of course, any costs they incur out of their budget for board build costs, there's a reimbursement process for that, as well as administrative cost that they'll have. So when you start piecing all the pieces together, it's less stressful. Of course, the big bite is next year when all this becomes annualized, because part of the impact this fiscal year is muted because we have a retroactive annual figure that we're giving them for the change in the day rate, but we're only taking 6 months of the gap back. And so you've got an annualized revenue impact and a semi-annual or a half of a year impact on the other side. So as you look at this annualized, you know, that looks a little different. Let's see. We're working on our contract language. We'll probably run that through the finance committee and get their feedback on that. We don't expect anything significant. It's going to be just, you know, making it make sense in regards to bands B and I because they're no longer capitated at January 1. And so we've got to address that in our contract language. Also, we've computed the residential bands, and I've got those floated out for review. And thus far, Pat's looked at them, and Debbie and Deborah Leopard, we've all huddled up and looked at the rates. We'll be sharing those Monday as a draft so that providers can start calculating what their money increase they can anticipate for residential services with the retroactive band increase related to the day program component nestled inside that band. We are also in the process of developing financial analysis with our team, and internal audit will play a role in that as far as helping us review the financial situation for those boards most detrimentally impacted and really not positioned well cash-wise to take that adjustment. Because we've got to assume that when they go through the acuity process, which Mary's going to go over, they may not get any additional funding. Maybe all their issues are operational and that they have adequate funding. And so we've got to really do a deep dive on the analysis side for those agencies, independent of the acuity. But when we look at the whole picture, we'll have to look at all of it together in the end. But then working on a loan process, I'll probably have something on the Finance and Audit Committee agenda for that on the February 1st agenda as we work through what that's going to look like. We have to begin meeting, I would call it a phase 2 of this project. We've really been focused on the external view of flip to fee for service as it relates to providers and everything related to providers, but we really now need to take more of an internal view of this and see what processes and procedures and review and authorization comparisons and different types of internal monitorship that needs to be put in place, as well as additional systems and accounting changes that we have to implement, which we've already started that process as far as changing our accounting. So we're going to have to begin those meetings. Also, the case manager role is going to be even more important. Now, nothing is new in regards to what case managers should be doing, but we're going to need to rely on them even more heavily in this flip, because the financial manager who used to have the band had an economic incentive or disincentive when it came to things that were charged against them. So they were monitoring a lot of things for us that really were case manager duties all along. And not to say case managers weren't doing that. I just don't think maybe to the extent we need. So we're going to be looking at that, as well as ensuring that the case managers have the tools and access to reports and so forth they need to do their jobs. Of course, all this is billable activity, so it's an opportunity for them to generate additional revenue. In a fee-for-service world, that's one of the good things about it. In the old band world, where they just got the same payment per month, you're talking about just more work you got to do with no payment for it. So, and in the end, I see this simplifying things in the provider world. I think we're going to, all change is difficult. I think providers are going to be freaking out over all the things that are changing, but you let the dust settle on this. Probably by the end of the fiscal year, I think if you, to a person, you ask them, is this easier? I think they're all going to say yes. We're working really hard to simplify a lot of processes, and this change has actually not incentivized, but it's assisted us in moving some of these ideas we had that were kind of held back, that we wanted to help make things more streamlined. This has helped, make that a possibility. So with that being said, I'm going to kick it to Mary, and Mary's going to give you an update on the acuity piece. And then if y'all or I can stop here, let y'all ask me questions, and then we can kick it to Mary, whichever you prefer, Mr. Chair.
Chris, I do have a question. This is
Yep.
Commissioner Rawlinson. Can you tell us when the budget hearing you referred to is going to be? And I know typically commissioners attend those meetings with other commissions. Should we be there, and what time and date is that?
I think it's limited as to who. Go ahead, Mary.
It's the 26th. I don't even have a report anymore. So all the stuff is in the report. It's on the 26th, but it is a not a virtual hearing, although it will be, I would assume be broadcast as it always is. And they're limiting the number of folks who can go to it.
Okay. All right.
So, I will need my staff, so, that is who's going to be going to this. And we do typically, if we were out of a COVID world, we would I think during my first budget presentation, I might have had one commissioner or two commissioners there in the audience.
Okay. I was just talking to some commissioners on other commissions, and they asked me if we went, and I told them I had not been to one, so that was why I was asking.
We invite, but usually they don't have to present. It's usually the staff that does that.
Okay.
I've gone once or twice to those, and they've never even so much as essentially done anything beyond acknowledge my existence. Never asked a question of us or had anything for us. They only wanted to hear from staff.
Okay.
And we're given 10 minutes, so we're really on a tight time frame too.
Okay.
Any other questions?
All right, so switch over to Mary to do her part of this.
Okay, yeah, because the other part of the Band B&I is, not only looking at the business model for each provider, but also looking at the acuity of the folks that they believe that they're spending more money on because they have higher needs, and that has not been addressed with DDSN over the last fairly lengthy amount of time. So we had submissions come in for the band flips, and based on those submissions, and also on the concerns that Kevin raised at the last commission meeting with regards to my involvement in the process, we tried, and the submissions were kind of all over the place. We had some folks that sent in a lot of documentation, had really well written, what I would say, justifications for the need for the band swap. But others didn't have much. And so basically we looked for a way that we can have at least one objective view of the individual's needs. And so the agency has in its arsenal of tools here at DDSN, and we've had it since July 2014, is the healthcare screening tool. We've also had what they call certified raters. The only problem with our raters is we didn't use, and that's RATERS, not raters. They are not, it's not that they're not proficient, they just haven't had a lot of practice doing it, so they took a long time to get it done, and they're getting better going through and using this tool with the providers. So we have folks that we've done a couple on the phone, because if there's COVID around, we're not going. But if there's no COVID, our staff is actually going to the providers and having these conversations with the providers and asking them to answer the questions, because you need somebody who can inform them. So we're gathering all that data now. Once we do this, but there's been no decisions made, by the way. So we haven't told somebody we're granting your swaps or we're not granting your swaps. At this time, we're just using it to see if the information that's garnered from this tool is something that will really help inform the process. The tool is nationally used. It's been here since 2014. It is used to look at care needs of an individual. It touches on all areas of life, including the two areas that are what I would call the high dollar amounts, the medical part and the behavioral part. And it is used in states to set acuity rates. But we're not at that point yet. We want to see how it works here. We also have providers that use the tool. So some of those providers are just sending in what they have. They're sending us their assessment. So what we're going to do is, if we think this is the best way to move into, that the swap part is kind of like revenue neutral for the provider and for us, right? But the next phase gets expensive for DDSN. So we really need to make sure that the information we're getting, and if the person needs to go to that higher needs band, that it is truly justified. And we're going to see if this is the tool we can use to help inform that next step. So when we get to that point, when decisions have to be made as to actually granting or not granting based on the information in the tool, we'll be bringing that to the commission at the next meeting. Right now, we're just gathering our documentation, improving our proficiency at doing the tool. And currently, we've got, Rufus has given us Rufus, you've given us 3 people from your area?
Correct.
We've gotten 3 people from Rufus's areas who are previously raters. We have put through training in QA 2 additional folks through there. So right now we've got 6 people out doing the tour. So that's kind of where we are right now. We're slowing down. Chris is working on the loan processing, so if people have cash flow issues, we will be able to address those in a timely manner. And I've also approached Kevin and asked if we can have a couple of his staff to help Chris with the analysis of the financial status of, it's not really financial status, we kind of know what the status is. It's more drilling down into the actual
Operational structure.
Yeah, operational structure, thank you, of the agency to see if gap money is being used to hold up a structure that's not 100% necessary. And that's all I have to report on that. Any questions?
How widespread is the tool through the rest of the community? I mean, I know we've had it for a long time, but not really been using it. But how widespread would you say the tool is?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
He's asking about HRST.
No, but
Yeah. Sorry, how wide, you said that there were some agencies within the provider community. How widespread would you say it was?
Well, I think Horry County uses it. Aiken had used it a while ago in a pilot by DDSN, actually. York uses it. Babcock uses it. I think Charles Lee uses it.
That Aiken, did you say Aiken already?
Yeah, I did say. So I think some folks were using it prior to TheraP coming in because they wanted one place to put all healthcare information. And the other part of the tools, it's more interactive. It's not just kind of like a repository of data. When you put this information in, it's reviewed and it spits back ideas as to, when you go to your doctor's office, they'll talk about, well, these 2 medications are known for interactions, or this person has diabetes. Have you thought about taking them to these other appointments as necessary? Or they're due for a mammogram. Because, you know, we don't have nurses in all our CTH2s, so having a tool that kind of gives you a little bit of that oversight, it was what I thought was a good selling point of the tool. Was one of the reasons we used it, because I didn't have nurses for every CTH2 to be in there on a monthly basis. So we had to prioritize folks, help, you know, basically say who needed a nurse all the time. This tool helps us do that. So.
Okay.
And like I said, we've used it, they were using it to screen people on the critical waiting list. But you do have to have a really good informant to give you good data for this tool. And sometimes when people are in crisis situations, that information isn't always great. I think once somebody gets placed, this is a good tool to move it forward, but we'll probably need to have something for those critical needs people that's a little less time intensive.
Any other questions about that part of the switch?
We're just using it as another means of gathering documentation.
Okay. All right. Anything further on that? Any questions at all for Chris or Mary? All right. Move on to the next item, which is the cost reports update.
All right. This is a standing topic. Again, nothing is in your packet in regards to this, just an oral update. I'm excited to announce that we have hired a staff. It's actually going to be an internal transfer within the organization. She'll start in our area February 2nd. She's very ambitious and seems to be a quick study from everyone we've talked to internally that has worked with this young lady over her career here. So we're excited to give her a chance to move up and develop a career. And so we're excited to have her join us, and we'll let you know how that's going in a future report. So we are trying to build our capacity back to prepare cost reports, because currently all we have is a bunch of folks part-timing it, and that's just not adequate. We've got cost reports are due in November 30th, and it's a very quick turnaround, and it's a very intense. It's very similar to a tax season, if you will, for a CPA, where you've just got a tremendous amount of work to be done in a short period of time. So we're glad to have a full-time person for cost reports, and I don't think we've had one for many, many years that I'm aware of, maybe since Chris LaGorde left. 2013 through 2015 is still moving very, very well with Myers and Stauffer. We're having lots of continuing dialogue and exchange of files and data with them on an ongoing basis. So I want to thank my team in cost analysis for their efforts there, as well as our consultant assisting us with that. From an internal perspective, we've been talking a lot with HHS and on these rates, the residential rates and so forth. And one of the things we've made a decision internally, and they tend to agree with it, is we need to probably work on 2020 data, which is more current than 18 or 19 as far as the cost reports that we need to complete that Myers and Stauffer has not been hired to complete. So we are shifting gears. We've been working on 18 or 19, and all that effort is not lost. It's still, we'll put a bookmarker where we were and make sure we can pick up where we left off when we get back to those 2 years, but we've shifted to 2020. The problem is we are missing many cost reports right now. We are missing 15 cost reports. That's a major problem. They are due September 30 in a normal year, and we're here at the end of January and still do not have these. So one of the things, we're having an audit directive meeting sometime next week or the week after internally, and I'm probably going to be proposing in that meeting that we implement a cost reports late filing penalty, because to be honest, the audit reports, they're not really as important as the cost reports are. The problem is the audit has to be done to do quality cost reports. So the fact that those cost reports don't have any kind of teeth to them as far as deadlines is a problem. So we'll be discussing that. And then if we can agree to that internally, we'll bring that to the Finance and Audit Committee for their consideration. We're working on training our providers and developing capability and competencies at the provider level, as well as with our CPA preparers. So we'll continue that effort. We've already had one training. It was fairly well attended, considering it was such a short notice and really at a bad time of the year in August, when people can ill afford to attend something like that. So we'll probably crank that training back up and expand it and do it prior to this fiscal year end. We're also going to revisit our format of our cost reports so that we get more useful information, and maybe in an electric format, so that we can do our QA effort much more efficiently. Right now we get printed cost reports and we have to go page by page and re-enter data, which is really not very bright or efficient. So we're going to be looking at that as well. And then really, I mean, I hate to be negative. I know I sound negative a lot when it comes to all this, but honestly, I mean, it's a truthful situation. For us to get where we need to go on our cost reports, the issues we're finding in our audits are just, there are so many problems we have. I mean, we can have a whole session just on this at some point if you'd like. And again, we're going to be pulling Kevin in to help with that review. But there's just so many issues there, and the audit is the foundation for the cost report. As we have been looking at room and board rates, we are finding even more issues, because with the cost reports, you have to take out all room and board expenses. They're non-allowable cost. And so as we look at room and board, we realize, and we compare them to cost reports, that we have issues there as well, where not all room and board is being properly identified and removed. And then when we look at, then also, this all goes hand in hand. So now we're looking at room and board and audits, and we find out we have all these cost allocation plan problems. Incorrect statistics, incorrect order of cost allocations, incorrect costs captured in the pools, missing cost pools, all kinds of things. So all these pieces go together, and we're working them all at the same time. And really it gets back to really doing a good job of training and communicating and developing manuals and directives. And our poor providers, even the auditors, our industry is so unique that there's not a school out there to do cost reports or to do our audits. So I can't blame our providers. This is not a dish on them. But we have really got to focus on training. And so the reason I'm bringing all that in is because this feeds right into our ability to do accurate cost reporting at the state level. So that's my report on the cost reports.
Okay. Any questions for Chris regarding the update? And I'm not saying, is there anything within that, Chris, that you need you're requesting any motions either on either topic that you have just covered? Just information.
No, sir, just information.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions or comments? Okay. Moving on then, the next item on the agenda is the internal audit monthly report. Kevin.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm going to change around a little bit just to segue into what Chris was talking about. One thing I was going to mention to y'all, we get the report on applying agreed upon procedures that come into our office. And as Chris mentioned with cost reports, we're having a hard time getting those. We've already issued $9,600 in contract reductions due to late reports. That's with 6 providers. We still have a number of providers that are late. We have a number of providers that have requested extensions that we granted that we're still waiting for those reports to come in. So yeah, somehow with the time frames that we have, we're going to have to do something to tighten this process up so that we're getting the audits, the ROAPs, the cost reports in timely so that we can then turn around. And when I say we, I mean Chris and his shop, get the information that they need for cost reports to HHS. And if this were a typical year, we would not have made our time frames this year, not by a long shot. So we definitely have to tighten this process down. And, you know, we'll talk about it in our meeting. We'll bring it to the Audit Finance Committee. But I think right now the contract reductions aren't enough to get anybody's attention because clearly they have no problem filing them late. So I don't know how we get this under control, but we definitely need to be looking at some way for that. And again, we'll bring any of those recommendations to the Finance Audit Committee before we move forward. So that was later in my report, but I jumped in just because it segued with what Chris was saying. Any questions with regard to that portion? All right, I'm assuming that I'm good there.
You are.
Next thing I wanted to move is we recently completed this week, y'all would have received the Supply and Services Division audit. You know, I don't want to read the audit to y'all. Y'all are quite capable of reading it. I can go over it at a high level, or really if y'all have any questions. I do know there were some questions about the exception rate with using the procurement card and the required forms associated with that. Those P cards are used for small dollar purchases, but it is in policy that there is a form that you have to complete and you have to complete it in its entirety. It's not a, well, I just don't feel like doing that today kind of option. You know, it is in policy. We had issues with that, as you can see, pretty extensively. We had one of our centers that didn't even, they're like, oh yeah, we don't do that form. We just send an email and say, hey, can I go by? So.
And that form should be completed prior to the purchase, right? Because you're really asking to make the purchase.
Well, you're asking to make the purchase. It is with a P card. So like maintenance may have an emergency and needs to go make a purchase, and then they come back and they do the form. But the form needs to be there to document the purchase and the need for the purchase, why it was required.
So, Kevin, I just have a question on that, the process. So when someone uses the P card to purchase something, is that a state card or is that a card in their name? Because I just wanted you to clarify that, and then I have another question on that, like how that works.
Yes, it is a state card, and yes, it is their name. So like somebody's P card will say John Smith, state of South Carolina.
Okay.
It has a limit set to it in terms of the maximum dollars that can be assigned.
Okay.
And that's done on the request form when the supervisor is requesting the P card for a P card for somebody. they'll put a maximum, what's the max purchase they can make. And then there is also like a daily purchase limit. That's one thing that we look for, is to make sure, in other words, if I had $500 limit, that we didn't see, oh, I made a $490 purchase at 2:11 p.m. and I made a $400 purchase at 2:12 p.m. That I was splitting purchases to try to get around the credit limits.
So you said it's in their name? Is that what you said?
It is.
So they pay their invoice that they get from the credit card company, or how does that?
The process is you fill out that form, you have the receipt, you turn that in to Supply and Services here, and that way when the documentation, when the credit card bill comes in, they have all the supporting documentation to support the charges on that. They get a massive bill that'll say John Smith and have the charges, and Ben Sherman and have the charges, and et cetera, et cetera. So they go through each of those and all the supporting documentation, the receipts and the completed form with the supervisory signature should be in there. And they're like, check, check, check. Okay, yep, it's all right to pay this.
So they're not there. So that is a safeguard, right? To say they've turned in everything, the form's complete. So if the form's not complete, why are they approving the payment on that card, or not suspending that card? Because the proper documentation wasn't provided.
I think Supply has to spend a lot of man hours chasing down people and trying to get receipts and that kind of thing.
Well, I mean,
so I think what you mentioned are good ideas, and I'm assuming, right, I know part of your Chris is in here and they send in the corrective action plan. So that's part of what they're looking at, is who really needs this? Do we need to limit these? Do we need to pull some of them back in? Are we having historical issues, repetitive issues?
The only comment I would like to make, if y'all can hear me.
Yeah.
Move my mic. First of all, we requested this audit because I knew procurement was a mess. When my former procurement director left, I sensed a lackadaisical, I don't care attitude in his management style, and that concerned me. And I hired a firecracker who's doing a fabulous job, and I would like Kevin to speak to that. She has inherited, like a lot of us, a really big mess that she's trying to work on. And in fact, she's identified a lot of these weaknesses and internal controls. And what Kevin did is came in and really helped identify and really show us the severity and the depth of the issues. And so one of the things with the procurement card is it was on autopilot. Nobody around here, the bill was just getting paid, but that's how things were done here. There was so little validation, double checking, auditing, internal control process. And so it goes right in line with everything else I've seen that we're working on. And so I do want to make sure that if Kevin can speak to this, his comfort level, I guess, with Candace, who's our new director, and what her approach has been since she's been here, because I think y'all probably have been able to pick up on.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What her style is and what her.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, she definitely wants to correct the citations that we had in here, and I think she will do everything that she can to get that done. One thing I would like to mention, it is in here. I think it's in the background portion. I don't want it to get lost. We sort of had the same issue when we looked at some IT related issues. In this audit, the procurement people at the centers work for the facility director. We have in here, consideration may want to be given to those people start reporting to the procurement director here at central office to ensure that policies are followed throughout. Because again, we had a high exception rate at the centers. We made the same recommendation with the IT folks. Those people work for the facility directors. And so at the time we did that audit, central office IT may be saying, hey, we've got new computers coming in and this residence, you need to run cable. And the facility director may have said, hey, the grass needs to be cut today. Go cut the grass. Well, they work for the facility director, so they go cut the grass. not be running cable. So I do think some consideration should be given for some of these folks that work at these centers where there are centralized operations here, that consideration be given that those people report to their director at the state office.
To allow for some consistency.
Right.
Because we're finding that too. We're looking at quality assurance for the same reason, investigations for the same reason, to make sure that we have consistency in all the processes and the things that they're supposed to do. So I firmly agree with that.
The other comment I'd like to make, if I could really quick, I know this is Kevin's report. All this stuff is on the state's website under the transparency reports. If you want to see all the purchases that are made on our procurement card, it shows every single employee and where they're buying things, when they bought it, what the amount was. So if you want to go on the state treasurer's website and go under transparency reports, you can look at Clemson University's, Lander University, whatever you want. All state agencies' procurement purchases are outlined.
Right. The LAC did do an audit several years ago, again, across a sample of agencies for P-card transactions. They made the recommendation at that time that all agencies, internal audit, if they had an internal audit function, ought to be doing an audit of P-card transactions. We have tried to follow that ever since they made that recommendation. It may be we just would go to one center and look at P-card transactions. This time it was more global. We looked at everything throughout.
Kevin, what was the acronym that you used? What does it stand for? You said an acronym, just like the beginning of that sentence. It was, we used to.
Sorry, the Legislative Audit Council.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the LAC, the Legislative Audit Council, they did an audit of procurement cards statewide and had some issues. And one of their recommendations was that internal audit functions needed to be looking at P cards. Now, MMO comes in to do a certification audit every 3 years. They have an audit team. And when they get here, one of the first things they'll do is come down to internal audit, at least at this agency. I'm assuming they do it at all agencies, and say, hey, what work have you done related to the procurement process? What audit work have you done related to the procurement process? Because when they come in, like everybody else, they have a lot of work and short-staffed. So they're coming in and really they're looking at sole source procurements and sort of outliers, if you will, and not the traditional process.
And what does MMO stand for? Sorry, I should know all these
Sorry,
things.
no, my apologies. Materials and Management Office. It's the state. It's part of State Fiscal Accountability Office. They also have an acronym, but I'm afraid to pronounce it because I'll screw it up.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Anything else, Robin?
No, that's all, but I had a question I wanted clarity on regarding that first part.
Due to timing, we couldn't bring this through the Finance and Audit Committee, but we are going to put it on your agenda, Robin.
Okay.
For us to discuss in more depth with you all on the first, so that if there's anything you guys want to ask us, we can dig deep in this.
Okay.
Well, I'll just say, one of the things I was curious about was how we got the focus on procurement, simply because I couldn't recall from my time where we sort of had a comprehensive report like this about something like this, that's sort of an agency function like that. I'm glad to hear that it was requested before a problem developed as opposed to afterwards, because doing, in my business, these cards get abused all the time. And the number one way they get, you look at it, the number one element that lets these things get abused from a criminal standpoint, some sort of fraud, is opportunity. If the controls aren't in place, that provides the opportunity, and all you need is somebody who gets a little bit of temptation. If they do it one time and they don't get caught, that's going to turn into them doing it over and over and over and over again. So I'm glad to see that we're trying to get ahead of this before we have that sort of massive. And I've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars taken on these cards in that sort of scenario.
Absolutely. When the LAC did their audit, I mean, the good news is we did not see. No, I was going to say there's no fraud, or
right.
A lot of times what what Agency C and what the LAC found was inappropriate purchases.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I mean, I've seen hundreds, I've represented people who over the course of, 5-10 years have siphoned off hundreds of thousands of dollars and $50 purchases here and $100 purchases there that just got paid because nobody was really checking on the procurement side of things,
That's what's suspected. When you see a decline in paperwork compliance, that means no one's watching it at the other end to say, hey, you can fill out this form right.
No, 100%.
And then when you go to that stop sign one time, you can keep doing it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I said, I think it's great that we had the request come in and that I was able to get on it and give us this report telling us where the flaws were so we can start correcting it. It's just something I feel like we should encourage, that this is a good report to get now that we've got a problem before we find out that we've been ripped off to the tune of $100,000 or something like that.
Right.
So I think that although it exposed flaws, the purpose of the audit is to expose the flaws so we can correct them. And as long as we circle back and get them corrected, and it sounds like the person that we have there's a lot of confidence in her ability to do that. So that's although the results of the audit expose the flaws, if the eventual result is good, I consider it to be a success.
Yeah, and I just would add that in the corporate world, when you don't submit the paperwork to justify your expense, then your card gets turned off and you can't use it for anything. So that usually puts a little bit of a fire under someone who needs to have access to the card for relevant, important purchases, to submit the right paperwork and answer the questions and do it the right way. So.
Robin, I agree with you. And recently we ran into some of this problem in Florence with our school board. And I don't know what steps we need to take to deal with this problem, but I feel very, very uncomfortable with it. And I feel like that we need to put something in place to where if they don't submit the correct paperwork, that their stuff is cut off. And I don't think we need to let it go on beyond a month because, like I said, I know that we've had some issues with school board members, and one of them was actually prosecuted for it. And I'm not willing to allow this to continue.
Well, there's a plan of correction in there, and and looking at all those different possibilities, Commissioner Rawlinson, as to what we do. I think just having someone actually paying attention to the paperwork at the top as opposed to what was happening. It just got to be where there really wasn't a lot of attention being paid to it. So, which is what raised Chris's suspicion anyway. That Kevin was going to find stuff.
And I understand it, Chris, I think there may be some recommendations coming through Finance and Audit next month.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Right. And I just want to close out by saying, as always, we will follow up. That we've received management's corrective action. We're going to come back in 12 months and say, hey, you said you were going to do A, B, and C. Did you do A, B, and C? And, hopefully they did A, B, and C, or they said, well, we did A and B, and when we started on C, we found that really wasn't going to work, but we did E over here, and that works better for us. And it's same thing, gets to the same end process, has the same, it's a compensating control. It just works better. So, we're going to follow up to make sure that management implements a corrective action plan, and of course report back to y'all.
And you'll be looking at the outcome. So you'll pull another sample of
Absolutely.
paperwork. And so you'll see if the outcome is better than what it was, then the controls are starting to work.
Okay. Any other, on that part of Kevin's report, any other questions, comments? Okay. Anything else, Kevin?
All right. I'm going to move on to the next thing. There's a lot of segues in my presentation. So Laurie was talking to you about case management earlier today.
Yes.
As I mentioned, we are starting a review of that, and we are in the midst of it. We have issued a survey to providers. We have asked them to complete it by tomorrow. So I just looked at it while the commission meeting was going on, and I just wanted to, again, I'm not presenting any findings or anything, but just sort of want to give you what I think is a bit of good news. So last month, again, looking at the surveys right before I came in here, last month we had 42 providers that submitted invoices for December to get paid for case management. To date, as of this morning, 26 providers have answered the survey. So that gives us a 62% response rate, which for surveys it rises to the excellent category. Right. Right. And, and I think that's because providers are highly motivated. This is important to them. And so when you see a high level of motivation, you see people participating in, if you have a survey, participating in that. We will, of course, send out a reminder today asking them to get us the information. But again, of the 26 responses that we have gotten, this is what I wanted to share with you. Really, to date, only 4 providers have said, we're trying to get out of case management in some fashion. 3 of those providers really are getting out of conflict case management, which they're going to have to do anyway. So with 26 providers, we really only have 1 provider who said, hey, I'm going to be getting out of case management services. I think that's very positive.
The survey, Kevin, how long is the survey? How many questions are on it?
It's very brief. There's probably and it cuts off depending on, if you say you're getting out of case management, then,
right,
it pretty much goes away. If you say, no, I'm going to stay in, I'm getting rid of conflict, it continues. But I mean, if you completed the whole thing, it's probably 20 questions. It's taken an average, because we can get that in our survey analysis. It's taken an average of about 3 minutes for them to complete. It's radio buttons. Primarily, there are text boxes in some area because we did want to give them the opportunity to comment, but we were trying to use radio buttons so that we could when we got the data, we can aggregate it and analyze it. So it's a really brief survey. So if any case managers are listening that have not completed the survey, please take less than 3 minutes and send that to us.
If you stop at question 1, it'll be less than that.
That's right.
All right, great. Go ahead.
I really think that was it. Just sort of, when Laurie was talking about that this morning, that's what made me pull it up. And again, I thought it was a bit of good news. So I wanted to share that with you.
Okay.
In closing, then the only other thing I have is about this BI process. I just want to say I expressed some concerns last month in terms of the independence of it. I just found out this week that we're using the health risk screening tool. I don't necessarily have an issue with the tool. I do sort of feel like, again, the benefit that I sort of bring is my entire tenure has been in this building, so I can see where past administrations have made some mistakes. My issue is the transparency of this. This started out, it was going to be a swap of G&Hs. It was going to be done. Phase 1 was going to be in December. Now it's a more involved process. I'm not sure when an end date is going to be. I'm not saying I don't think that this is the tool to use. We just need to make sure that the people that are using it are trained in it. And I think we need to inform this body, meaning the commission and the provider network, when we're making these changes, and inform them prior to, not after the fact.
Yeah. All right.
That's it for unless there are any questions about any audit related matters, that's it for me.
And to somewhat from the transparency front, Kevin, when the discussion came out about starting to switch to that, or when that became a possibility, I will say that Mary did come to me as the chair and said, I'm looking at this, just so you're informed. So to the extent it wasn't presented to everybody, but again, from an administrative standpoint, as part of our normal conversations, Mary did bring it up to me fairly a good chunk of time ago as the chair that this was something that she was looking at and would be making the presentation that she did today. So I do think that again, I don't think that's unusual in my tenure. A lot of times there's a conversation if I'm looking at this and I'm going to be revealing it, or not revealing it, but going over it with the commission as a whole, but I'm bringing it to you as the chair in advance of that. And that was done a pretty good chunk of time ago. So just as an element to alleviate some of that.
And we also talked to the
concerns
involved, say we want to try this out, let's see what we're doing. As far as the qualifications for the people who are doing the screening, they have to go through a training. I mean, there's an online process with the company that owns the tool. And that's why we call them certified raters. So they do have that. And the provider is heavily involved, so it's not like anyone, like they don't know what we're doing. They have to be the informants to the tool. So, I took Kevin's comments from last month, although I didn't agree with them all, I took them into consideration. And I am not a certified rater, so I am not out there doing this. And I also offered him that if he's got people that are certified raters that are out there and they're willing to travel, we'll be happy to take on more people. But it's better to start with a smaller group, get them really up and going so they can pair with the next person to rate. So we're expanding our rater pool by kind of pairing people up on the first couple and then they can move out on their own. But I don't see any conflict at all with the executive exception policy, because we're just trying out tools to see what will best facilitate the best process for the providers. And I apologize if we're not meeting the timeframes that we had first said that were out there. The problem is I'd rather have it done right than done fast. So, because we're playing with people's money and we're also playing with the individuals who require the support. So ultimately that's, and to go to Kevin's point about the problems of the past, every time we report something, we're reporting and fixing a problem of the past. But one of the things that I thought was always a problem with previous folks is that they didn't listen to feedback from the field. That when people said, hey, whoa, slow down on this is not working right, to step back and say, sometimes you've got to punt, sometimes you've got to make a decision or field decision that something is not being done properly or is not good enough. And I want it to be good enough. That's all that is for our folks. So that's where we are. There's nothing, I'm not hiding anything from anybody.
So Kevin, when would you, what is an acceptable amount of time, for example, with the example we're talking about with the screening, when would you have liked to be brought into that discussion?
Well, I didn't find out that it was happening until Tuesday, in Tuesday's executive staff meeting. It was referenced. I'm assuming at some point in the past that decision was made. Gary has said Mary told him about it. So I don't know if that was, I keep saying we can only monitor what we know about. And if meetings are taking place, I don't know if that decision to go with HRST was a unilateral decision made by management. If there was a meeting of the programmatic side of the house that said, hey, why don't we go this route? And if so, if it was in fact in a meeting, then internal audit didn't receive an invitation. So, we're here there was a comment made about offer advice, ask questions. If we don't have the information, we can't offer any advice or consult or ask questions or, my goal is, again, looking out for the commission and for this agency. And, I think that there are policies in place that they're there for a reason and they need to be followed. And I do think that, the relationship between DDSN and the provider network is a partnership. Now, depending on who you ask, some would say it's parasitic, some would say it's symbiotic, and some may have other adjectives for it. But at the end of the day, we're going to have to work together. So I think there needs to be communication with them, and the communication needs to be up front. And when that doesn't happen, it just creates more stress on that partnership.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda is the legislative update. Kim.
Thank you. I'll try to get through these fairly quickly. These are just some bills that I'm following with this legislative session. First is H 3180, Vulnerable Adult Maltreatment Registry. That would give DSS the responsibility of maintaining a list, kind of like the sex offender registry, of people who have been convicted of mistreating a vulnerable adult or, elder abuse, that sort of thing. S53, the Juvenile Justice Reform Act, part of it is to amend 63-19-1450, that a child with a developmental disability can't just be committed to DJJ, and a court may order an evaluation and hold a hearing to see if that juvenile should be remanded to DDSN. H 31-81 is something that will be of significant interest to the commission. It establishes training and adds qualifications in order to be a commissioner. I can send you all a copy if you'd like to read it, or if you have any questions now, we can address those.
I'd like a copy of that immediately, like as soon as possible, like today.
Okay.
Yeah, that needs to get out, because that's the one that I went to a while back, and there were some issues that we presented. So I'm very curious as to how they've adjusted that.
Mm-hmm.
So please, let's get a distribution of that ASAP.
Adjusted it.
Yeah, I'd be very concerned about that, what that bill would say.
Okay, yeah, well, I'll get that as soon as I'm able before the end of the day. We also have H 3513 and
What number was that again about the commissioner's qualifications?
H 3181.
Thank you.
Okay, H 3513 and S 264. It's to establish the Disabled Self-Employment Trust Fund. And the difference between the two bills is that the House bill gives that program to Voc Rehab, and the Senate version gives it to DDSN. So we'll need to look at that to see, probably decide who may be the best person to house that program and administer it. So that would probably, we'll need some discussion about that to see if we make recommendations to either the House or the Senate committees. Next, H 3244, the Employment First Initiative Act. That directs state employees or state agencies and other government entities to come up with competitive and integrated employment policies. And it also establishes the South Carolina Employment First Oversight Commission, and Director Poole would be on that commission if it passes. And it's basically to make sure that people with disabilities are being fairly employed by state and government entities. H 3516, there's some amendments to the Family Support Services Program, and I forwarded that to executive staff to see if there are any negative impacts with those amendments, and we'll take a look at that. The next one, H 3209 and S 229, the South Carolina Child Abuse Response Protocol. It would establish child abuse protocol review committee, and on that committee would be one member from a statewide organization experienced in working with children with disabilities. So that could be another committee that DDSN could possibly be committed to, or some other statewide organization. It didn't specify whether it had to be a government entity or it could be a private organization. And then there's H 3161 and S 290, and this mildly This is just something that should be on our radar. It's really more of a DHEC thing, but there are some changes to the language for the State Health Facility Licensure Act. So we'll just keep an eye on that just in case, but that's really more of a DHEC bill than ours. Pending any questions, that concludes my report.
All right. Any other questions regarding the legislative update? Okay. Yeah, just let's make sure we get that one out as soon as possible, Kim.
Yep.
All right. Next item on the agenda is the COVID update. Rufus.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to give a brief update regarding some surveillance data and then just general information that I think is important during the current public health emergency. To speak to Commissioner Blackwood's comments regarding morale and Lori's comments regarding resiliency, I think that applies to both our provider network and facility administrators and all the staff actually providing direct care, and particularly to our families and the folks that receive services throughout the pandemic. I think our system has shown a lot of resolve. So kudos to parents and those that receive services through this agency. I think that this has really demonstrated the positivity of Synergy. Given some of the reports I talk about, you'll find that the positivity rate has increased, not only throughout our system, but throughout many parts of the nation. With respect to individuals served through DDSN, we have a total to date, and this is effective, I think, Tuesday's numbers, system-wide, 1,084 individuals served that have tested positive for COVID-19. The breakout between regional centers and community is as follows.
Excuse me, Chairman, could you get the microphone closer to Rufus?
All right. Senator Thomas, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right.
You are very soft talker.
Okay, I'll work on that, Mary. All right, the breakout of positives in terms of individuals served, and we'll get back to it because this is serious. 242 individuals that are in our care at our regional centers have tested positive. In community-based programs, 842 individuals served have tested positive. With respect to fatalities of individuals served, the total system-wide reached 40, with 3 of the fatalities occurring over the last week and a half. And so our our thoughts and prayers go out to the families of those individuals, as well as the support staff and agencies that were fortunate enough to serve them. With respect to our workforce, our collective workforce, we have a total of 1,959 members of our workforce that have tested positive. 425 are affiliated with our state-operated intermediate care facilities or regional centers, and 1,534 are affiliated with our provider network. Vaccinations are underway throughout South Carolina as well as the nation. The state is in what we call phase 1A. Yesterday, that was a development that I think is important to share with families, and we're going to get some communication out today, as well as publish it in our situation report that's due out tomorrow. But parents of children who are medically fragile or have complex or severely disabled children are now eligible to receive vaccinations under 1A. And that announcement was made by DHEC yesterday evening. And so advocacy agencies like Family Connections, Pro-Parents are trying to get that information out. And so we want to do our part to make sure that we share that communication throughout our network so that it can get to families and caregivers. That's important. Of course, 1A has been widely communicated that it involves essential healthcare workers and individuals on the front lines working or have the high potential to be exposed to individuals who are positive for COVID, as well as residents and staff are affiliated with long-term care facilities, individuals 70 years of age and older with and without underlying conditions, as well as some of the individuals in our congregate care settings licensed as community training homes and supported living programs. With respect to vaccinations within the state-operated regional centers, we've held 3 clinics through our partnership with CVS. I would say that the clinics have gone fairly well given, the all of the logistics and prerequisites required. There's a lot of paperwork that's affiliated with conducting these clinics and a lot of coordination. So kudos to facility administrators and their staff, and for the community providers that have participated with CVS and or Walgreens. Again, there's a lot of collateral duties that people have to absorb in order for these clinics to be successful. With respect to individuals served, we've vaccinated of the 3 centers that have held clinics, roughly 69%, and I think that's a really positive number, given, again, how these clinics are being rolled out. Again, there's a lot of paperwork, so if individuals have declined or we don't have consents, they're not part of the first round of vaccinations. We have clinics scheduled this week at 2 remaining centers that have not held clinics with CVS, and then we have second clinics scheduled beginning in February for the centers that have had their first clinics. And again, we're receiving the Moderna vaccine, and so that's a two-shot vaccination with the second dose occurring 28 days from the first dose. And so from a staff standpoint, staff are becoming more acceptable to participating in vaccinations. As you've seen through media reports, there's a lot of myths and misinformation regarding vaccines, but I think the staff that have participated during the first clinic have shared with their colleagues that, and fortunate for us, there hadn't been any reports of any adverse reactions or serious adverse reactions. So hopefully that'll encourage some of the staff members who didn't participate in the first round of vaccinations to participate in the second round. So with that being said, we'll talk about the hero pay or hazard pay. To date, we've awarded roughly $825,000 in hero pay or bonus pay for folks working directly with individuals who are COVID positive. A positive development, and kudos to the fiscal staff for taking the initiative to pursue funding through the CARES Act. We've received relief funds that basically have absolved us from any financial harm. I think up to October, the relief funds that we receive have covered the amount of hazard pay that we've extended to our personnel. So that's really positive. So kudos to Chris and his staff for pursuing, relief funding to help supplement the agency's operational expenses associated with this very worthwhile program. And again, kudos to the commissioners for supporting this, because without it, I think we would have seen a lot more staff, have reluctance in working in such, compromising positions in high-risk situations. So it's a very positive program. We continue to keep our Emergency Operations Center activated throughout the public health emergency. We meet weekly. We provide communications internally and externally to our provider network, primarily through with the providers and the public, as a whole. We post our situation reports on the DDSN website, so they're archived, and we hope to push a report out tomorrow. And those situation reports contain a lot of worthwhile information, salient news regarding the public health emergency, flexibilities granted to states and to agencies like ours and Health and Human Services to help our provider network and individuals who receive services to have access to them, as well as information regarding economic relief for a lot of the agencies that are struggling to maintain, operations and positive balance sheets. Because again, no one could have predicted the length of the public health emergency, but again, in terms of the economic and mental health and operational effects on businesses, throughout the world, it's just been unprecedented. So we try to share salient information, and we'll continue to do that as we move forward. So this concludes my COVID report, and I'll stop now to entertain any questions that the commission may have.
Okay. Thank you, Rufus. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you please give them an update on the vaccine advisory committee's recommendations from yesterday with regards to the language for, did you already mention this?
Yeah, with the parents. Yeah, I mentioned that. Yeah, they were added to 1A.
I really want to make sure that folks understand that even though DHEC has added that language to the website, a lot of the locations for the vaccines have yet to load that into their sign-up sheets, right?
Correct. And hopefully, as the communication spreads and and Mary's referring to the addition of parents and caregivers of children with complex healthcare needs, medical diagnoses. And so again, we're going to, share that not only today in a special memorandum that we issue, but also in situation reports. And we also include a link, vaccine locations. It's called the Vax Locator. And so to help make sure that information is widely available.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you clarify kind of how that vaccines are being administered? When you mention the clinic, do you mean that, just clarify that, are we taking the individuals to a CVS or Walgreens to get the shot, or are they coming in to the facility and doing them?
Yeah, great question. Actually, through the partnership, and it's really been very positive in that, and we're partnering with CVS, but again, Walgreens is also clinics, but they actually come on site and set up. And I haven't actually been a first-hand observer, but I receive feedback reports on their proficiency, and they show up early. They establish kind of sites to administer vaccinations. There's some paperwork, that has to be input. And then they basically, have individuals come to them and go over the information sheet and facts associated with the Moderna vaccine, which is what we're receiving. Make sure individuals consent and understand, and then administer the shots and understand it's a quick and painless process.
Okay, great.
It was a little giddy up in the beginning. They kind of showed up a little early when they weren't supposed to be there, but they've got that routine, as with all processes, it kind of works out over time.
Actually, it was on the wrong day, but
The wrong day.
but given, again, this is unprecedented. I think DHEC, CVS, Walgreens. Today I read that Harris Teeter is going to start offering vaccines. So it's really been phenomenal. I know, of course, there's, folks want things to go faster, and we all do. But just given the magnitude of this process, all the reports from staff on the ground and from my provider network that I've talked to that have participated, Walgreens, CVS, and also hospitals have been phenomenal to work with. So.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Rufus. Moving on to the next section of the agenda, that is new business. The first is the Special Committee on Commission Communications. This arose in the context when we were reviewing the committees as part of the policy committee, the standing committees versus a special committee. And it was decided that it was appropriate to have a special committee specifically to address public image issues, including visibility, professional appearance of meetings, branding, nameplates, name tags, tablecloths, state seal usage, logo review, hospitality for meetings, website page appearance, social media features, vehicle license plates, plaques, and onboarding initial contact orientation materials. So essentially a special committee to review these areas right now. It would not be a permanent standing committee, but would deliver a report with some recommendations on these areas. And so I would like to create that special committee. I would ask Barry to chair that committee and would ask Robin and Stephanie if they would agree to serve on that committee as well. Are y'all in agreement with doing that?
Sure.
Yes, very much so. I wanted to ask though, so we are planning on having one meeting and doing and making some recommendations regarding the signage and the where's my mind? the possible state seal replacement in a couple of places, and possibly things like tablecloths and things of that nature. So my question is, can we get a budget that we can spend on that, or do we have to bring back a report next month and then get the committee decided? We're only talking about, I would think we're talking about less than $3,000, maybe even less than $2,000. I just don't know offhand. It's far less than what Mary can go ahead and approve for us. And I just wanted to know how you wanted to handle that, because I think we could just go ahead and say we have an X amount of budget now, and we could just start the process.
I would rather see what the recommendations are and go from there and have the commission approve them. And then I think the next step would be, once we want these 10 things, the staff would then be responsible for going out, price them, and seeing where they were on the. I mean, I don't know how to set a budget when we don't know 100% what we're looking at. So I think it's a chicken egg thing. I think we have to decide what we want and then have the staff go out and price it for us and go from there. I agree with you. I don't expect, we're certainly not talking about large amounts of money here. But I think anything where we're spending other people's money, we got to be careful about it. So I think the better way to go is to make the recommendations, and then we get some costs from the staff, and then we have a vote to approve that or not.
Okay, well, we'll try to. I have a very good sheet that I'm going to send to everybody about not only what we're thinking about doing, but why we're thinking about doing it. That was created, that Commissioner Robin was wonderful in creating, and well, her and I, and well, basically the committee was helpful in creating, and I'll send that out to everybody on the committee, so you'll understand what we're trying to do. And most of them will not cost any money. I would hope. I don't think that even the website stuff that we're doing is actually going to cost us direct money, but I would ask that we would move forward as quickly as possible to continue to look into those changes for the website, particularly, and the Facebook page.
Okay.
So we can get started on that, so we can have a real report next month.
Sounds good. I saw Robin had said that she was good with serving on it. Stephanie, I just didn't hear anything from you. Are you good with serving on that committee?
Yes, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and designate that special committee, and I don't think we need to have a motion for that. I think that's just at the chair's direction to create the special committee.
I agree.
Unless anybody feels otherwise. Okay. All right. So the next item under new business would be the financial update. Again, going back to Chris.
All right, well, thank you. If you'll look under tab 12, you'll find your financial update. And again, Nancy Rumbaugh generates this for me, our budget director, and we're working on some enhancements still, trying to work through some additional information I think would be beneficial for you all to have. At this point, we still have not made any of those enhancements, but they are being worked on in line with other priorities that we have. But anyways, the report you have indicates that we're about 2.8% below budget midway through the year, or almost $21 million. Again, to reiterate, within our expenses of $353 million, there is a additional provider payment due to how we pay providers and prospectively. When you adjust for that, we're approximately $37 million below budget, and approximately 5% still under budgeted expenditures. Comparing our December 2020 expenditures of $353,853,655 to December 2019, the expenditures were $352,438,506 for about $1.4 million over our prior year expenditures, which I fully expected, with a variety of causes for that. One of which, of course, is we've given the Genetics Center $2 million that was passed through us this year that we didn't have last year. So that alone causes that. The other point I would mention is that with the public health emergency being extended now through April, we will continue to receive 6.2% enhanced or increased FMAP. I expected that to end at the end of this quarter, but with Secretary Azar extending that, we should be receiving those additional funds throughout the entire fiscal year. And basically, like Rufus stated, we have had staff again that I would like to acknowledge by name if I could. Diane Welsh, Nancy Rumbaugh, Kelly Anderson, Michael Bell, Andrea Hodges, and Debbie Wilson put an enormous amount of hours and effort into securing CARES Act funds. We have been approved at this point for almost $2.3 million in CARES Act funds, and I have asked Nancy, who generates this report, to clearly segregate those costs on this report. We have had to do that within our ledger, but we have not made the appropriate adjustment on this sheet because those are unbudgeted expenditures. That was a cornerstone of asking for that money. So it was limited to things that we did not have in our budget that you had adopted earlier in the year. So that's the extent of my presentation, and hopefully at the February commission meeting we'll have some form of cash projection ready for you that will be reliable.
Okay. Any questions regarding the financial update?
Yeah. Chris, I know in our Finance and Audit Committee meeting, you mentioned or it might have been in the last commission meeting, the pilot program that we're going to be a part of for the VDI software. Was that reported in our last commission meeting, or was it the Finance and Audit that you shared that I think that was commission, wasn't it? Commission meeting. Okay.
No, it was the Finance and Audit Committee, at the last Finance and Audit Committee meeting about the money that we will not need to be spending for the computer program.
We can certainly, we can speak to that now, Robin, if you would like.
Yeah, I would.
Well, she's not finished.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that the whole commission heard about that, that change, and then I'll ask my question, I guess, or see if anyone.
Yeah. So we at the same exact time we were running in a parallel universe apparently with the Department of Admin, who was also looking at rolling out a VDI project, virtual desktop infrastructure, which is similar to the old dummy terminal system that you've seen in the old days. So we're kind of going full circle, but what it allows you to do is really deploy your IT resources and security in a very laser focused manner and a very inexpensive manner. And so we were moving along with our own VDI project. We have to turn in an IT plan annually to the state. We had submitted to them earlier in the fiscal year all of our IT projects we had on our plate for this year, one of which being VDI. So of course, as they implemented their VDI, they noted that we were planning on doing the same thing. So Michael Mickey, our IT director, had many calls with them, as well as Health and Human Services, who was part of the initiation of that program with Department of Admin. So we will join the Department of Health and Human Services and utilize the Department of Admin's process, which will save us approximately $500,000 out of our capital budget that you had already approved. And in fact, you had approved the purchase. So we put that money back in our coffers, and that money will be able to be removed out of the capital budget and not expended this year.
All right.
Any follow-up or additional questions?
So,
Go ahead, Robin.
so you're saying that when you say back into our coffers, does that mean capital improvement money that we can use elsewhere?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It remains in our capital budget plan, but when we close out the fiscal year, it'll be funds that we will not have had to have expend, and will probably be proposed that we roll it over into the following fiscal year as part of fiscal 22's capital funding.
And that's the only place that, look, we couldn't add that to another budget item so that we could use that for to help with the deficits that we're going to be having in other areas. What would that be? Adding it to the,
We could actually make a motion to make it part of the capital improvements. To bring that 500,000 directly to capital improvements, which would solve that problem or nearly solve that problem for the rest of the year.
would we need to, it sounds like someone has these.
If you're not speaking, to mute your microphone. We've got a lot of background noise coming from somewhere.
Yeah, I think someone.
Yes, so it was merely a projected utilization of our cash balances, and so we've foregone spending cash that we would have otherwise had to spend, and so where those funds will probably end up being needed is in our deferred maintenance at our regional centers. We have a significant, we're going to start doing, I don't know if they started this week or next week, but we're meeting one-on-one with every facility administrator and trying to get a real good handle on the situation with their facilities, not only capital-wise, but also furniture, painting, floor coverings, things that have really been neglected. And so I could see us possibly requesting to use those funds in that area.
Okay, and you called that deferred maintenance?
Yes, ma'am. And there's a lot of it.
Right. Should we make a motion for that, or is there something we should specifically do now that we're not spending this money where we thought we were going to spend it?
I would state, my recommendation would be when we bring forth a recommendation to purchase a bunch of furniture, that part of that recommendation be to utilize the funds that were unexpended out of the capital budget for that purchase.
Is that, when you say furniture, are you talking about capital improvements money as well?
Yeah.
Those things don't rise to the level of capital improvements. They are just, I really need Rufus to speak to that situation out there, because I haven't really seen the facilities. I've just heard stories about, I'm putting you on the spot here, buddy.
Yeah, through the years, there's just been kind of a divesting from the regional centers, and with the new administration and commitment to making sure that where individuals live and call home, that we lead by example. And so we're just trying to catch up years of physical plant neglect and operational neglect from making sure that we infuse funding into the regional centers to give facility administrators and the staff and the folks that are served there the opportunity to enjoy newer things. And then from a capital improvement standpoint, we have large fixed systems, commercial generators, commercial HVAC, and that when those things in the past we run to failure, which creates all kinds of operational nightmares when the air conditioning goes out in summertime in the South, that where we have to possibly relocate individuals or group people together, for repairs that should have been already in queue to take place, that cost more and leave and create inconveniences for the folks that we serve and for our staff, because we don't have a preventative maintenance plan or a plan to address things before they go bad. So this is very positive, it's very proactive, and I believe in line with where the commission and the administration's headed. So,
I mean, in a nutshell, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about theoretical spending that we're not going to have to do, and at some point in time, we're going to change that into actual spending in the capital improvements area, right?
Correct. We would repurpose those dollars.
So
there are plenty of needs unmet this time.
The point being is those need to be identified, and then staff needs to bring to us a recommendation that we convert that theoretical spending that didn't happen into actual spending on something else. And I think when we know what we're going to spend it on, that's when we can have a motion to do. I mean, otherwise we're just making a motion to spend it on something, right?
Correct. That would be my view of it.
And what we need to have is we need to make sure that staff is getting us those recommendations in, as soon as legitimate so we can get that work, anything that we've deferred, anything that we can catch up to make the living conditions and the working conditions better, we want to do it.
Right.
So I think we can hold off on a specific motion on those funds until we know where it's going to be spent. But we need to have some recommendations on where to spend it.
Okay.
That would be my position.
We just don't need to spend it on other things until we decide where we're going to spend it in that regard. Is what I'm trying to get to possibly move it to another. I wasn't trying to make I don't think Robin or anybody was trying to make a motion to spend it on a specific thing. We were just trying to move it to another department so that it would be used in that department. But if we don't even know what department, then I guess we can't do that. But I mean, I would think it would be. I would think it would have been capital improvements, because we hear a lot about capital improvements, and it's just a golden opportunity to do something about capital improvement situation.
I think it's definitely in the area of capital improvements, but that's a pretty big area. So before we approve spending, rather than just say it's in capital improvements, I'd like to know where in capital improvements we're talking about. Whether it's, yeah. I just want to know
which facility or whatever.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
That clarity.
Any other questions regarding the financial update? Hearing none, would entertain a motion to accept the financial update as presented.
So moved.
Do we have a second? Okay.
Barry Melver, second.
Thank you. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? And let the record reflect that motion passed unanimously. Next item, Chris, is the fiscal year 21 second quarter amendment summary.
Yes, sir. You all requested that you receive this on a quarterly basis, and this is for information only. You have a tabular, which is not very easy to read report. It really couldn't be fit very easily on a single page or even 2 pages and be legible. So I apologize for how it's broken up. But anyways, we had a total of $2.4 million in total amendments processed for the quarter October through December. If you will note that the primary funds going out the door are for bands B and I. $1,010,000 for band Bs and $1,144,000 for band Is, for a total of $2,155,000. So that only leaves approximately $250,000 for other types of adjustments that were made. These bands are funded throughout the fiscal year, but we're turned around and we took those funds, to do our amendments properly. We had to fund them for the full fiscal year, knowing that we were going to turn around in January and defund them for January to June. So of this $2 million, at least half of it, it would be more, because these things, again, were occurring between October and December. So at least $1 million of this was taken out in negative amendments that you guys do not see. Because you haven't requested that information. You'll only see it in the summary format like this when those types of amendments occur. If you go through provider by provider and note those that are over $200,000, I did do a review and validate that all the ones that exceed $200,000 for the quarter did not have an individual amendment done in excess of $200,000 that you did not see. So that would be my report on this, Commissioner.
Any questions regarding the amendment summary? Thank you for preparing that, Chris.
Sir.
Hearing no further questions, we'll move on to the State Director's report.
So that's usually good news. I just want to give you an update on the EVV now, the electronic visit verification project. Now that, Director Baker is gone, And we have an interim director. His name is Thomas Clark Phillip. Regarding our efforts of the two agencies to comply with this requirement set forth in the 21st Century Cures Act. DHHS calculated the estimate of the 2021 calendar year 0.5 FMAP, which is the federal Medicaid assistance percentage reduction, to be $425,000. They have transferred that amount to DDSN. HHS stated that they intend to incorporate DDSN into its existing EVV implementation plans to reduce provider abrasion, use existing agreements and infrastructure to expedite implementation and better align our billing practices. This effort requires time and will be completed over the course of the next year. HHS has provided a single year of bridge financing to ensure the good faith efforts underway between our agencies, and they did put this forth in a letter that was sent on January 4th. And we've already got the money, so that's always good too. DDSN staff continues to work with providers and HHS to ensure compliance with the home and community-based regulation, and I wanted to include this in my report. I'll have Janet make a formal presentation in 2 months to let you know, because I know it's one of our goals set forth by the commission, to make sure that you guys kept up to date on as to where we are in this process. And just as a reminder to everybody, the federal guidance was issued back in July of this year, allowing states 1 additional year to comply through March 17th, 2023. So as a result, other timelines have been extended. If a state determines that a setting isolates individuals from the broader community, has implemented remediation strategies that brought the setting into compliance with the setting's criteria by July 1, 2021, then that setting will not need to be submitted to CMS for heightened scrutiny review. This is something that we are striving for with our providers at this time, to get compliance with that. States may submit to CMS isolating settings that have not completed necessary remediation for heightened scrutiny review no later than October 31st. Hopefully, we're not going to have anybody that goes through that process. Information on settings located in the same building as public or private institutions, or on the grounds of or adjacent to a public institution, have to be submitted for heightened scrutiny no later than March 31st, 2021. As of today, 100% of our providers have submitted their compliance action plans, or CAPs. This does not necessarily mean that they have sites that are not meeting the settings rule. 89% of them are done, completed, thorough, good plans. We have about 6 providers that we're still working on their plans to get all the pertinent documentation together, get everything corrected and completed. Now, when you talk about settings that may be presumed to be isolating, we have 115 settings that we have identified that require what they call evidence packages showing how they are not isolating. We have received 108 out of the 115 thus far. And remember, when we talk about these, we're talking about individual settings. That's why there's so many more of these than there are of the CAP plans. I wanted to explain that. 14 out of the 108 we have so far. This is a long process. Not only do you have to do the evidence package, you have to submit it for us to review to make sure it's complete. And then when Janet Priest is sure that this is meeting the bar, she sends it over to HHS for a joint state review. Once it gets through that joint state review, then it's considered good and it's put over in the complete category, and it will not be submitted to CMS for heightened scrutiny. We've had 14 of the 108 go through that process completely, and with all 14 out of them meeting the bar. So that's good news. And it sounds like it's slow, but it is a slow process because you want to make sure everything in those packets are correct. We have 4 additional evidence packages that are scheduled for review during the first week of February. And the last category, which is identified as category 2, which means that the facilities are located on the grounds or adjacent to institutions, they have to go to CMS for heightened scrutiny. So we have 5 of those identified, and all 5 of their packages are done, complete, and ready for submission. So what our next steps are is that staff is continuing to provide advice, consultation, and the collection and finalization of all those compliance action plans that are remaining out, and continued review, finalization, and then review with DHHS of all the state level review team evidence packages that need to be gone through. And at this point, staff and HHS are confident that we will be hitting all those benchmarks. Okay, any questions about that? All right, hearing none, state budget request. We knew this was going to be a tough year. I mean, we're dealing with COVID, we've got a continuing resolution we're going through, so we did not anticipate getting additional funding from HHS, but we still pushed, and the governor's budget, we didn't get cut. I guess that's the good news. The bad news is actually we didn't get any new money for any of our budget asks. We were allocated first fill slots, like Chris spoke about after Jason Taverner's comments, that we did get $1.8 million for those folks that are going into the waiver for the first time, and that we're going to be responsible for their state-funded services. The governor did not fund the state match increase we're going to get hit with on nursing and attendant care rate increases. If utilization goes up in these areas, we could have a serious issue on our hands. This is one of the things I will hit hard in the House and Senate budget hearings, because the rates have already gone up. So there's actually not a choice in the matter. We're going to have to pay whatever HHS set that rate at. So we truly did not receive any additional funding. The governor did fund Greenwood Genetics, and I want to make sure that everybody knows that was not, it's on our budget request because that's where it has to be. We put it at our lowest priority because it's not technically our request, it is Greenwood Genetics' request, and we're just the pass-through agency. But the governor did fund that project, the $2.5 million for the Genome Project. So, and that is not reoccurring money. That's a one-time request. We did get our hearing date was pushed from the 19th to January 26th, I think because the House went to virtual mode this week, and they wanted us to be physically present, so they thought they put it off a week. And so far as I know, we are first up after the House adjourns from its morning session. So it could be any time, 1 o'clock on. And all of our information was already at the House Ways and Means Committee even prior to our January 19th date that we had first. We continue to work with HHS on revamping the waiver enrollment process. And of course, our IDRD waiver renewal is full steam ahead. And Commissioner Blackwood spoke of the case managers and her concern about the case managers and their morale. Now, they can't really see folks. I do know a lot of case managers are doing home visits, but not everybody. And I also want to make sure that we have, and Rufus said it, but he talks more softly than I do, so I'll say it more in a louder voice, that we want to thank all the regional center employees and the community providers, because we're inching close to a year battling this COVID thing. When I remember when we first started talking about it, it's like, 2 weeks, this will be over, or a month, this will be over. And here we are going into a year. And we've got staff that is going in every day, steadfastly providing care for folks that are ill, and taking that on, knowing that they've lost colleagues and we've lost individuals. So I don't think anyone thought we'd still be having this conversation at this time, but we are, and I continue to be grateful for everything those folks do. I'm also very grateful for the vaccine that's been developed, and that our folks have the opportunity to begin receiving vaccines in that number 1A. For those of you on the frontline staff who are declining the vaccine, because of something you may have read on social media. I just want to say that we have vaccinated quite a few folks thus far, and we've not lost a one of them. But I can say with certainty that we've lost friends, coworkers, and family to this virus. And that is not made up internet stuff. That is a fact. We need to take the illness seriously, and I want you to think long and hard about declining a potential safeguard for this virus. So again, as soon as I'm able to sign up and get a vaccine, I will be there. I don't want to jump the line on anybody. So that is my report. Thank you very much.
Anybody have any questions regarding the state director's report? Looks like we just lost Stephanie.
Oh, no.
I just saw her go offline.
Well, I don't need a motion for it.
No, that's true. Okay. Next item on the agenda is executive session. I'm not aware of any pending executive session matters.
We don't have any, sir.
All right, then there'll be no need to enter into executive session. And so we will move on. Before we do set the next regular meeting, I did want to thank Christy for the packet that she put out trying to do this via distance, having everything with tab labels and numbered so that we could track in the packet as people were doing it remotely was made it much easier. So Christy, thank you very much for putting that packet together for us.
Commissioner,
yes.
I wanted to say, am I the only one that keeps getting bumped off of this thing?
Yes.
Because, okay. All right. I can't figure out what exactly is happening, but every so often I just go out and I heard none of Mary's report. So if Mary, if you've got that typed, if you could just drop me a copy of it, I would appreciate it. This is Stephanie. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't go off on my screen until actually she was done.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
The volume kept going off and I kept pushing the button trying to get it come back on and I was getting nothing and then it just blanked out. So I just didn't want you guys to think I just deserted you.
The joys of technology, right?
That's right.
Okay. So our next regular meeting will be set for February 18th, 2021. Based upon where we are at from a COVID standpoint, we will follow up as far as some training that we wanted to do and whether we're going to be pushing this as a remote session like we did again, or whether we can be together in person. But we'll follow up on that as we get a little bit closer to that date and see where we're at. And so would then entertain a motion to adjourn for the day.
So moved. David here.
Second. Thank you. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then we are adjourned. Thank you very much. If we can go ahead and stop the broadcast.
Okay.